December 31, 1943, 08:12 a.m., 23,000 feet over western Germany. The formation was tight. 48 B-17 flying fortresses, boxed in staggered echelons, roared forward through the frigid blue above the Rhineland. Frost laced the inside of every bomber's cockpit window. Condensation from a dozen oxygen masks hissed softly under the thunder of 4 Wright Cyclone engines per plane, 192 engines in all, synchronized in a deafening dirge of American industry on wings. Each fortress carried 12.50 caliber Browning machine guns. That meant 576 guns in total, bristling from every angle: chin, cheeks, top turret, ball turret, waist, windows, tail. But the Germans didn't know about the new nose guns yet. They thought they could still come head-on. They thought wrong. Captain Roy Buzz Kincaid of the 91st Bomb Group squinted against the glare. His windshield was a smear of light and vibration, his gloved fingers trembling on the yoke. Beneath them the target was still 20 minutes out, rail yards at Ludwigshafen, arteries of war bleeding east. But already the contrails had begun to curl. Not American. Too high. Too thin, too fast. "They're coming," said the bombardier, a calm whisper through the intercom. Buzz didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all felt it, the subtle shift in the air, the tension crackling behind their skulls. His flight engineer was already pivoting the top turret toward 11 o'clock high. "Bogies, bearing 25, the gunner called. Buzz saw them, 12 dots black against the blue, slicing downward in a perfect claw. The 109s, BF 109 G6s, he guessed, yellow-nosed devils, the Gustavs. But the ones in the center had square-tipped wings and twin cannons under each wing. Focke-Wulf 190s, those were the real killers. A single mote of sunlight flickered on glass, then it vanished. No flares, no signal, just attack. The Germans came in fast, too fast, head-on. Head-on, 2 o'clock, close. Buzz slammed his foot pedal, bringing the nose a fraction right as the lead German flight committed. In the blink of an eye, the sky exploded. Not with bombs or tracers, not yet, but with noise. The rattle and staccato bark of synchronized .50 cals burst from the lead fortresses. Hundreds of guns stitched the air with shimmering lines of molten brass. A second passed, then another. And then, like something invisible snapping, 4 of the incoming fighters simply disintegrated midair. They didn't peel away, they didn't smoke and fall, they evaporated. Their engines shattered like dropped glass, wings wrenched off in opposite directions. A cockpit canopy cartwheeled skyward with no pilot inside. Buzz couldn't believe it, neither could the Germans, but it was real. The new cheek and chin turrets, reinforced for head-on defense, had turned the flying fortress into something far deadlier than its nickname implied. "Jesus," murmured the co-pilot. "Nope," said Buzz, "just Browning .50s. The second wave tried to break wide and slash through at angles, but the forts were ready. Like porcupines, the bombers erupted with fire in all directions. Waist gunners walked tracers across the sky like they were painting death in long, sweeping arcs. The tail gunners locked onto a 190 trying to climb past, and within seconds it spiraled backward into the clouds, leaving nothing but black smoke and shards of silver skin. "Confirmed kill," came the call from the tail. Buzz stole a glance downward. Through gaps in the clouds, he could see 1,000 acres of forest racing beneath them. The formation was still intact, no bombers lost yet. But the fighters kept coming. One of them, an ace by the look of it, his nose painted with a grinning black skull, darted between 2 trailing bombers like a needle through cloth. He had no fear. He climbed, rolled inverted, and then dove back head-on toward Buzz's cockpit. Buzz didn't blink. He squeezed the yoke forward just enough to tilt the nose downward, giving the chin turret a clear shot. Inside it, Corporal DeLuca was already firing. The German's wings lit up with fire as he came in. Yellow tracers whipped past the B-17's canopy, close enough to see the pilot's goggles. Then the .50 cals hit him. Not once, not twice. They hit him in a cone of converging fire from 3 fortresses all at once: nose, chin, and top turret. The fighter exploded in a plume of fire so fast and bright it looked like someone had dropped a magnesium flare out the window. No parachute, no debris, just gone. "Holy," said the navigator. "Stay on course," Buzz snapped, but even his voice trembled, not from fear but from awe. These weren't bombing runs anymore. This was air war evolved. By 08:28 a.m., 14 German fighters had engaged the formation. 12 were gone. 2 had broken off, smoking, heading west. None had gotten through the front arc. And none had laid a finger on the bombers. Over the intercom, laughter broke out. It wasn't joyful. It was nervous, shaken, a reflex against the impossible truth. These boys had grown up hearing how lethal the Luftwaffe aces were, names like Hartmann and Barkhorn whispered like myths. But now they'd watched them get shredded by the sheer volume of synchronized American firepower. The Flying Fortress wasn't invincible, but it wasn't prey anymore either. Then a new sound cut through the static. New contacts, big group, 10 o'clock high, estimate 30 plus. The laughter stopped. So did Buzz's heart for a second. 30. He lifted his binoculars, focusing past the blinding blue. There they were, bigger formation, faster, smarter, likely veterans, possibly Gruppenkommandeurs. They weren't making the rookie mistake this time. They weren't coming head-on. They were flanking, diving from above, using the sun. Buzz cursed. "All ships, tighten formation, watch the top side. They're trying to pick us off from altitude." From the rear of the formation, a young waist gunner named Charlie Hess said quietly into his mic, "They're learning." Buzz didn't answer, because Hess was right. And if the Germans were learning, then this fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. To be continued in Part 2. You said. Continue the script or currently on 10K plus characters per message. ChatGPT said. Continuing the script, Part 2 of 6. But they didn't expect what came next. The second wave, 30 strong, wasn't some haphazard scramble of rookies. These were seasoned hunters. Their paint schemes weren't standard issue gray. They had personal insignia, daggers, flames, lightning bolts, and iron crosses shaped into beasts. These were men who'd survived North Africa, the Eastern Front, and the defense of the fatherland since '39. One of them had 13 kill rings painted on his tail. They knew better than to come straight in. But even the best fighters in the Luftwaffe hadn't fought what the 91st Bomb Group was flying now. Not in this configuration, not with overlapping fields of fire and integrated radio coordination between squadrons. The B-17 was no longer a flying target. It had become a flying trap. At 08:32 a.m., the lead German formation initiated its attack. 3 FW-190s dove from the sun, aiming for the seam between the 2nd and 3rd squadrons. Their angle was steep, 50 degrees, and their goal was simple: get in fast, fire, and get out before the turret gunners could swing around. They succeeded on step 1. The lead fighter screamed past the top of the formation at over 450 miles per hour, spitting 20 cannon shells that blew open the left elevator of one B-17. It didn't go down, but it started to bleed altitude. Then the second fighter made its pass, this one lower, skimming just above the starboard wing of Buzz Kincaid's own fortress. Buzz flinched as a burst of tracers tore through the sky, not 2 feet from the cockpit. But then came the retribution. The top turret, left waist, and tail guns opened fire in synchronized fury. Bullets laced the FW-190's fuselage as it banked hard right, trying to escape. It didn't make it. Its wing clipped the edge of a trailing bomber's elevator, just enough to send the fighter into a fatal tumble. It didn't explode. It didn't break apart. It simply fell, spinning like a leaf, until it vanished into the clouds below. "Score one for the left waist," someone muttered into the intercom. Buzz's voice was dry. "Don't count M yet." More were coming. 9 more fighters split from the main wave, coordinating to strike multiple angles at once. One came in low, skimming below the B-17s to fire up into their bellies. Another tried to blindside the tail gunners, while 2 more zipped between the formation's flanks. But every angle had a gun. Every gap had overlapping coverage. And every man had practiced this exact nightmare in drills for months. The B-17s came alive. A fortress off Buzz's left wing took a hit to the nose, cracking glass and sending the bombardier's body limp in the harness. But the plane kept flying, gunners still firing from its flanks like enraged hornets. Charlie Hess, just 19 years old and firing his waist gun like a demon possessed, screamed into his mic, "Firing starboard. He's coming back around." Buzz watched the FW-190 in question wheel up, bank left, and aimed directly for the rear of the formation. Big mistake. The tail gunner, SGT, Howard Green, was waiting for him, a Kansas farm boy with eagle eyes and nerves like wire. He had already anticipated the turn. The .50 cals barked. 4-second burst. Tracers lit up the belly of the German plane. Then the right wing tore off clean. The 190 dropped like a rock. "Splash one," Green said flatly. They were holding the line, barely, but Buzz knew this couldn't last forever. Already, one B-17 was trailing smoke from its number 2 engine. Another had lost its top turret completely, a gaping hole where the turret once sat, and no reply from the gunner. Buzz's own aircraft had taken a few hits, one through the nose cone, another through the port rudder, but so far they were intact. "Navigator," Buzz barked, "how far to target?" The voice came back, tight with tension. 7 minutes, maybe less if the wind holds." 7 minutes. 7 minutes of hell. The Germans weren't letting up. They were rotating now, attack, break off, climb, and re-enter in sequence. Their discipline was brutal, their accuracy even more so. But the Americans had something else, mass. A single B-17 was a bear to bring down, but in formation, it was like flying through a city of machine guns. At 08:36 a.m., another group of German fighters joined in, this time, Bf-109s with drop tanks and extended ammo belts. Buzz counted at least 10. "They're coming in 2 by 2, said Green over the tail intercom, "stacked high and low." Buzz grit his teeth. "Copy. All gunners prioritize coordinated fire, don't waste bursts." What came next was chaos. The 109 split formation and dove from different altitudes, swarming the rear like wasps. One broke left and clipped the wingtip of a B-17 before exploding in a spray of fire. Another rammed straight into a turret, shredding itself and the gunner in a single, mutual kill. The tail end of the formation was now bleeding altitude. One of the bombers dropped out completely, engines ablaze, its crew bailing out in staggered parachutes that bloomed like flowers over the gray German countryside below. Buzz watched them fall. 5 men, 6, 7, that was all he saw. The rest didn't make it. "Shoots confirmed," came Green's voice. "At least some of M." Buzz forced himself to look away. There was no time. Not when another fighter, painted silver and blue with a red lightning bolt, was now diving directly toward his own cockpit from above. High noon, heads down. Buzz yanked the yoke left and dropped the nose. The fighter passed within 20 feet of the canopy, its guns spitting flame. Bullets slammed into the B-17's fuselage, riddling the top of the fuselage and blowing open one of the oxygen tanks behind the flight deck. A hiss of white gas flooded the cockpit. Buzz choked, eyes watering. The top turret opened fire late, but landed 3 solid hits before the fighter vanished into the distance. Buzz coughed and clawed for the emergency oxygen. He slapped the mask back on. "DeLuca," he gasped, "report." The chin gunner's voice came back, strained but steady. "Still here, guns hot, I clipped him. Might have got the tail." Buzz nodded. "Good, stay ready." At 08:39 a.m., they finally saw the target. Ludwigshafen. The rail yard. The black spiderweb of tracks stretched beneath them like veins. Dozens of boxcars, fuel tanks, warehouses. The bombardier began to count. Bomb bay doors opening. Buzz steadied the yoke. The flak would come next, but so would the bombs. Then, without warning, Buzz saw it. A final fighter, just one breaking through the mess, diving straight for the lead bomber. His bomber. The German wasn't aiming for a pass. He wasn't firing his guns. He was going to ram. Buzz knew it in an instant. The angle, the speed, the posture of the wings. He screamed into the intercom, "Chin gun now, take HIM." DeLuca didn't hesitate. The twin .50s on the B-17's chin let loose a roar like ripping canvas soaked in gasoline. The bullet struck the fighter dead center. The nose crumpled inward. The canopy shattered. And the German pilot, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, was thrown backward in his harness as the fighter spiraled out of control and detonated 100 feet below. The explosion rocked the lead B-17, but it stayed intact. Buzz felt the shockwave pass through him like a second heartbeat. Then the bombardier's voice, "Target acquired." The bombs fell. 12 500-pounders tumbled from the bay, followed by wave after wave from the squadrons behind. A full minute of falling steel. A full minute of vengeance. The ground disappeared beneath rising smoke, fire, and twisted rail. Buzz didn't cheer. No one did. They were too busy counting which planes were missing. 6. That's how many they lost on the run-in. But they dropped their payload. They decompleted the mission. And most shocking of all, they'd annihilated one of the most experienced German ace flights ever assembled. With Browning .50 caliber machine guns. The sky behind them was a graveyard. 6 B-17s gone, dozens of parachutes drifting over snow-covered fields, 8 enemy fighters still burning on the ground, some with twisted wreckage embedded in barns and trees, others smoking in craters gouged into frozen soil. More had been torn apart midair. It was hard to tell what had exploded and what had simply vanished under the combined fire of a dozen guns. And still, the 91st Bomb Group was flying. Buzz Kincaid glanced at his instrument panel, shaking slightly from the turbulence of the flak they'd skimmed over Ludwigshafen, and tightened his jaw. The yoke was sticky in his gloves. They'd taken damage, but all 4 engines were still roaring. "Status," he rasped into the intercom. His co-pilot Tom Crenshaw answered first. "Starboard 2's running hot, losing manifold pressure." "Feather it." "Not yet, still holding, hydraulics sluggish." "Crew." "Navigator's bleeding, took a chunk of shrapnel, Doc's working on him. Everyone else accounted for." Buzz nodded. "We're not out yet, gunners, eyes up." Because if there was one truth every bomber crew learned fast, it was this. The Luftwaffe hit you hardest after you dropped your bombs. You were heavier on the way in but lighter on the way out, and that made you faster, more maneuverable, and therefore a greater threat if you got home. And they hated that. They hated knowing you were going back to England to tell others what you saw, what you did. Which is why they always sent more fighters for the return. At 09:12 a.m., 10 minutes after bombs away, the next wave came. This one wasn't led by aces. These were younger pilots, raw, fast, and desperate, Desperate was worse than skilled, Buzz knew. Desperate made them reckless. Desperate made them ram. A pair of BF-109s came in from the 5 o'clock low position, deadliest angle in the book. They used the sun and shadows to blind the tail gunners and slipped through the smoke trails of damaged forts to get in close. Buzz heard it before he saw it, the telltale whine of props at full throttle, rising above the low thrum of the formation. Then Green's voice exploded in his headset. 5 o'clock, close coming in under. Buzz didn't even have time to reply. The bomber 2 ships behind him jolted sideways in a blast of fire, one wing sheared clean off. The 109 had fired its 20 cannon at near point-blank range and ignited the wing tank. There was no time for shoots. But Green got his revenge. The second 109 emerged from the smoke, too slow to react. Green hosed the sky with twin .50s, a perfect crossfire as the waist gunner joined in. The fighter was shredded like paper, spiraling downward in a black corkscrew. Buzz tightened his formation, dropping altitude 500 feet to force the Germans into a shallower attack dive, where they'd lose speed and expose themselves longer. "Stay close," he ordered. "Overlap coverage, don't break." That was the doctrine, mutual defense. A bomber alone was a coffin, but a bomber in a box was a fortress, flying steel, rotating guns, with every man watching the back of the man next to him. And it was working, barely. A 190 clipped the rudder of a fort off the left wing. The rudder bent but didn't tear. The gunner inside didn't flinch. He turned and stitched the sky with suppressing fire as the fighter broke off and climbed away, smoking, but not dead. Another fighter came in upside down, firing blind, guns inverted, in some kind of insane stunt maneuver. He managed to hit the ball turret of a trailing bomber, and Buzz watched in horror as the tiny dome of glass burst outward in a fountain of blood and sparks. But the fort didn't fall. The gunner inside was gone, but the rest of the crew held course. It was quiet for maybe 60 seconds after that. No more fighters, no more flak, just the long, endless drone of engines and the metallic clunk of gunners reloading ammo belts. Then Crenshaw said it. "They're gone." Buzz didn't respond. He didn't believe it. Not yet. He checked his altimeter, 22,800 feet, winds holding, heading west. England was still 400 miles away. They demated out of German airspace. But not out of the war. At 0940, just as the formation crossed into the borderlands near Belgium, Buzz spotted something glinting to the south. He pulled his binoculars. At first he thought it was flak bursts, small puffs of gray and white, but the shapes were too sharp, too fast. Then he saw them, 2 formations, one American, one German, converging. P-47 Thunderbolts, Jugs, diving head-on into a mixed flight of German fighters, an air battle below them. The cavalry was here. The P-47s weren't escorting the bombers directly. Not anymore. They'd already handed off the run-in protection to Mustangs earlier that morning, long-range P-51s that had dueled and chased the early interceptors for hours. But now, somewhere below, another unit had found a group of German fighters trying to regroup for one last rear attack. And they weren't letting it happen. Buzz watched as a Jug rolled inverted and dropped through a 109's flight path. A flash, a burst, and the 109 went spinning down, its tail sheared off like a leaf in the wind. The gunners on the B-17s cheered. They could see the Americans chasing the Germans off now. For the first time in an hour, the sky was theirs. But not without cost. The final casualty report wouldn't be tallied until they reached Bassingbourn, back in England. And even then, it wouldn't show everything. It wouldn't show the navigator who bled out at 23,000 feet, holding a pencil in one hand and his chart in the other. It wouldn't show the chin gunner in the 4th Squadron, who stayed on his weapon even after losing half his right arm. It wouldn't show the waist gunners who had to step over the frozen bodies of their comrades to keep feeding ammo belts into blazing Brownings, hour after hour, attack after attack. And it wouldn't show what Buzz felt now, deep in his chest, as he looked down at the Rhine far below and realized that somehow he'd lived. Not just survived, lived. Every day after this one would be a gift. Every breath a miracle. At 10:27 a.m., the first coastline appeared. Buzz saw the faint curve of the English Channel beneath a thin layer of clouds and almost wept. Crenshaw saw it too. Home. Buzz nodded. Home. They touched down at 11:41 a.m. The landing gear locked, the tires screamed, and the Fortress rumbled to a halt on the Bassingbourn runway, trailing smoke from the port engine. Ground crew sprinted out. Buzz opened the hatch and climbed down slowly. His legs nearly gave way. He hadn't realized how numb they'd become. Medics were already lifting wounded out of bombers behind them. Other Fortresses limped in one by one, some with jagged holes in their fuselages, some with half a wing missing, some with gaping noses torn open by cannon fire. And some never returned at all. Buzz stood on the tarmac and stared back down the runway. He watched the sun fade behind low gray clouds and realized something strange. He didn't remember what the last fighter looked like. He remembered flashes, wings, paint, fire, screaming engines. But he didn't remember the face, the moment of impact. It had all happened so fast. That was the point, wasn't it? German aces wiped out in seconds, by American bombers they never expected could fight back. Not like that. Not head-on. Not with 576 synchronized guns answering every dive, every angle, every pass. They'd been trained to believe bombers were helpless. They learned too late that the Fortress had changed. And by the time they realized it, most of them were already falling from the sky. The debriefing room was silent. Not out of respect, at least not formally. It was the kind of silence that came from exhaustion so deep it settled into the bones. 32 bomber crews sat slumped on folding chairs, shoulders slouched, oxygen masks hanging loose, some still bleeding through their flight suits. A few had been carried in. No one spoke unless asked. The only sound was the scratching of pencils against clipboards as intelligence officers moved briskly down the rows. Captain Roy Kincaid sat near the front, his hands trembling slightly on the armrests. "Tell us about the head-on engagements," the intel major said. His voice was clipped, precise but not cold. He'd flown combat before. He knew the weight in their eyes. Buzz exhaled. They came in fast, 4 at a time, sometimes pairs, but always head-on, direct, like they'd never seen the chin turret. "They hadn't," said the major. He looked at the tech sergeant beside him, who scribbled something onto a green pad. Buzz went on. "Our new ships, those with reinforced chin mounts and staggered cheek guns, those are the ones that survived the first wave. The older forts, the ones still using the old nose glass, they were the first to go." He didn't mean it cruelly. He meant it plainly, like a funeral reading. How effective were the forward gunners? Buzz looked at the sergeant to his right, Corporal DeLuca. The kid had bags under his eyes, black as bruises. His hands were still raw from where hot brass had burned through his gloves. DeLuca didn't look up, he just said, "I fired 2,000 rounds in the first 20 minutes, killed 2 head-ons, hit a third. Might have saved the whole ship on that last one." "You did," Buzz said quietly. "You absolutely did." The major nodded. "And the Luftwaffe tactics, did they shift after the first losses?" "They adjusted fast," Buzz said. "The aces broke off once they realized we had interlocking fire from the nose. They tried flanking, vertical dives, low passes, but it wasn't coordinated. Not after we took out their lead element. I think we caught them flat-footed." The room murmured at that. Because that was the real takeaway. More than the bombs dropped, more than the fuel depots destroyed or rail yards cratered. They had survived an entire Luftwaffe interception wave. And they'd shredded a squadron of elite German fighters, some of them aces, without a single fighter escort left in the sky. Just B-17s. Just gunners. Just .50 cals. Buzz felt a strange weight settle behind his eyes. It wasn't pride. Not yet. It was something else. Responsibility. They were flying weapons now, not just bombers. The Army Air Forces had turned a heavy aircraft into a platform that could wipe out some of the best-trained pilots in Europe in seconds, if the guns were manned, and if the crews stood their ground. And that's what scared him. Because it meant the war had shifted again. They weren't prey anymore. They were predators. And predators had to keep hunting. The next morning, Buzz sat in the hangar, watching the ground crews work. His own B-17, Queen of Vengeance, had taken 27 hits. None had penetrated the cockpit. None had disabled the engines. One had nearly shattered the tail rudder. Had the angle been 5 degrees steeper, they'd have gone into a flat spin. A mechanic stood on a ladder, welding a new brace onto the wing strut. Buzz sipped from a tin mug, the coffee inside lukewarm and full of grounds. DeLuca came up beside him. The kid looked different in daylight, thinner, paler, like the adrenaline had drained out of him and left only the scaffolding. "You sleeping?" Buzz asked. DeLuca shook his head. "You." Buzz gave a soft laugh. "I don't even try until the hands stop shaking." They sat there a while in silence. Then DeLuca said something Buzz didn't expect. "I didn't think they'd die like that." Buzz turned. "Who?" "The Germans, those fighters. They were supposed to be fast, untouchable, that's what everyone said. But they came right at me and then they were gone." Buzz didn't answer right away. He remembered the moment vividly, how the fighters had lit up like struck flares, blown apart not by bombs or rockets, but by simple bullets, dozens of .50 cals converging in overlapping arcs, turning each enemy fighter into a mid-air scrapyard. "They underestimated us," Buzz said finally. "They thought we were just trucks with wings. They didn't expect every corner of our ship to bite back." "They didn't expect me," DeLuca said softly. Buzz looked at him. "No," he said, "they didn't." 3 days later, the 91st was back in the air. New target, Merseburg. Fuel refineries. Deeper into Germany, denser flak belts, stronger air defenses. And word was, the Luftwaffe had regrouped. They weren't sending aces in dribs and drabs anymore. They were massing full Gruppen, 40, 50, even 60 fighters in coordinated waves, backed by twin-engine Zersterer interceptors like the Bf-110s with upward-firing Schrage music cannons. They were coming to kill bombers. Period. And this time, they weren't underestimating the fortresses. Buzz flew lead again. Queen of Vengeance was patched, polished, and rearmed. The chin turret had a fresh belt of armor-piercing incendiary rounds. The B-17s had adapted too. Buzz had rotated his formation, top gunners on alert, waist gunners rotating fire discipline, chin turrets firing staggered bursts to bait the fighters into overcommitting. It worked. In the first 4 minutes of combat, 11 fighters were confirmed destroyed. One exploded midair, the fireball so bright it seared the retinas of half the flight. Another tried to crawl underneath Queen of Vengeance, firing up at the bomb bay. But DeLuca was ready. He twisted in his harness, took the shot backward, fired blind based on engine sound, and nailed the 109 with a 3-second burst that split the cowling and sent the fighter tumbling into the fort behind it. Buzz saw the collision, 2 enemy fighters gone in a heartbeat. He keyed the intercom. "DeLuca, was that you?" A long pause. "Then told you, lightning." Buzz grinned. Then the sky tore open. Below them, flak erupted in patterns, not wild blasts, precise, coordinated. The Germans were learning how to network radar sites to triangulate formation altitude and box them in. B-17s began to vanish again. One behind Buzz took a direct hit to the wing root, severed clean. It rolled over once, then fell in silence. No shoots. No time. But the rest kept flying. Because that was the doctrine. That was the oath. You don't break formation, you don't drop out. You fly through hell and you fire every gun you've got. At 08:39, the last wave of fighters came in. And this time it was personal. Buzz recognized one of them, a black-nosed 190 with red kill markings. He'd seen it before, over Bremen. It had peeled off a fort that day with a clean cannon burst. Now it was coming for Queen of Vengeance. It dove from above, engines howling, guns flashing. Buzz didn't flinch. He held course. DeLuca didn't wait for the order. He opened fire 3 seconds before the fighter reached maximum range, then walked his tracers up until they connected mid-dive. The 190 tried to roll, then stalled. It clipped the wing of another fighter below. 2 flames. 2 trails. 2 more gone. Buzz exhaled. DeLuca leaned back. And for the first time in his life, he smiled during a mission. Because in the span of 5 minutes, they'd wiped out another squadron. With Browning .50 cals. Again. The waist gun stitched 2 more off the port wing, one tumbling through smoke, the other vanishing in a blink as tracers ignited its fuel. All around them, the other forts returned fire. A wall, a dome, a storm of .50 caliber hate so thick it looked like black rain falling upward. Buzz caught glimpses of it, fighters pitching upward and veering away, not because of hits, but because they had never been hit before and they didn't want to find out what it felt like. And yet some still came. One 190 dove straight down at the formation, desperate for a kill. He got 200 yards from the nose. Then DeLuca blew his engine apart. Buzz felt the concussion, watched the pieces spin into the underbelly of another fighter behind it. There was no coordination now, just flailing. And in under 90 seconds, half the attackers were dead or gone. Buzz checked his watch. Aces wiped out. In seconds. Again. When they touched down at 12:16 p.m., Buzz didn't speak. He didn't need to. The crew of Queen of Vengeance had fired nearly 9,000 rounds between them. Their bomber had returned with 23 confirmed holes in the fuselage. One engine would need replacement. The tail rudder was bent. The bomb bay doors were jammed from a near-flak miss. And yet they'd returned. They'd flown to Berlin. Dropped their bombs. Survived 60 fighters. Killed or repelled over 30. All with .50 cals. Buzz walked alone across the runway, his boots crunching in the frost. From across the field, he saw DeLuca sitting on a crate, hands wrapped in bandages. He'd kept firing even after the chin turret caught a sliver of flak, ripped into his right forearm, tore the sleeve clean open. But he didn't let go of the trigger. Buzz nodded. DeLuca nodded back. No words. Only truth. They fought death head-on. And they won. Not with speed. Not with armor. Not with luck. But with raw American firepower. 576 synchronized .50 cals operated by men who refused to die quietly. German aces had learned the hard way. The fortress didn't bluff. It bit. And by the time you realized it, it was already too late.